Emily Williams' life seemed ordinary, defined by quiet routines and the joys of raising her family in a small, suburban town. But everything changes when her 8-year-old son Jonah bursts through the door one afternoon with an incredible claim. He's met his twin brother at school. Dismissing it as a child's imagination, Emily is unprepared for the shock that follows a school photo showing Jonah standing next to Ethan, a boy who looks so much like him. It's as if they were mirrors. Driven by curiosity, Emily reaches out to Ethan's mother, Claire, only to uncover a stunning truth. Ethan was adopted. As the pieces begin to fall into place, Emily's husband, Sam, grows uncharacteristically tense, evading questions and revealing cracks in their marriage. The deeper Emily digs, the clearer it becomes that Sam has been hiding something tied to Jonah's birth that he's kept buried for years. When the truth finally comes to light, it leaves Emily and Claire reeling. Jonah and Ethan are not just lookalikes, they are twins, separated at birth by circumstances neither family fully understands. As their sons forge an unbreakable bond, Emily and Claire must confront their own fears and navigate a delicate path to bring their families together. But rebuilding trust isn't easy. For Emily, the betrayal from Sam cuts deep, threatening the foundation of their marriage. For Claire, the revelations about Ethan's past stir questions about the choices she made as a mother. Together, they must rise above their doubts, finding strength in unexpected kindness and the resilience of their son's unwavering love for each other. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the half-open blinds of the modest suburban home, casting warm golden streaks across the living room. Emily Williams sat cross-legged on the beige carpet, surrounded by unopened cardboard boxes and stacks of books. She exhaled heavily, brushing a loose strand of auburn hair out of her face. The house, still smelling faintly of fresh paint, was far from perfect, but there's a new chapter for the family, far from the chaos of the past year. Her husband, Sam, had finally landed a steady job as a mechanic in this quiet town, a godsend after months of instability. The financial struggles had been hard, but it was the emotional toll that weighed most on Emily. Moving here was supposed to be a fresh start for all of them. Her Sam, 15-year-old Lily, and 8-year-old Jonah. A sudden crash from the kitchen made her flinch. "Mom, it's okay. Just a plate." Jonah's voice carried through the house, full of youthful energy. Emily smiled despite herself. Jonah always had a way of lightening the mood, even when she felt the world was closing in. She heard his small feet patter toward her, and soon he appeared in the doorway, his blue eyes sparkling with excitement. His dark hair, messy as always, stuck out in every direction. "Mom, guess what happened at school today?" he asked, nearly bouncing in place. "Let me guess," Emily said, trying to suppress a grin. "You convinced your teacher to let you skip homework again?" "No, better than that." Jonah plopped down on the floor beside her, the intensity in his expression catching her off guard. "I met a boy. His name is Ethan. He looks just like me." Emily blinked. "Just like you? How do you mean?" Jonah leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I mean, he has my eyes, my hair, even my nose. And his laugh sounds like mine too." Emily chuckled, reaching over to ruffle his hair. "Sweetie, lots of kids can look alike. Maybe he just has the same haircut as you." Jonah frowned, clearly unimpressed with her response. "No, Mom, you don't get it. It's like he's my twin or something." The earnestness in his voice gave her pause. "Jonah, you don't have a twin. I would know, don't you think? Maybe we got separated at birth," Jonah said, his tone carrying a mix of curiosity and determination. Emily laughed lightly, though a small knot of unease formed in her stomach. Jonah had always had an active imagination, but this was new territory even for him. "How about this?" she said, softening her voice. "Why don't you bring Ethan over sometime? I'd love to meet him." Jonah's face lit up. "Really? Of course. I'm always happy to meet your friends." With a satisfied nod, Jonah bounded out of the room, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts. She picked up a photo frame from the floor, carefully dusting off its edges. It was a family picture taken 3 years ago, back when things had felt simpler. In the photo, Jonah was grinning from ear to ear, a gap in his front teeth, while Lily rolled her eyes beside him. As she placed the frame on the shelf, Emily tried to shake the lingering unease. Jonah's words echoed in her mind. He looks just like me. Later that evening, the family gathered around their small, rectangular dining table. The scent of spaghetti filled the air as they passed around plates and forks. Sam, his hands still smudged with grease from the shop, leaned back in his chair and sighed. "How's the new job treating you?" Emily asked, handing him a napkin. "Busy, but it's good," Sam replied. "People here are friendly. Always nice to work somewhere that appreciates you." Emily nodded, grateful for the stability. "That's all we need." "Guess what, Dad?" Jonas said, his fork clinking against his plate. Sam raised an eyebrow. "What's that, buddy?" "I met my twin today," Jonah declared triumphantly. Lily, perched at the end of the table with her earbuds in, snorted. "Sure, Jonah. And I'm the Queen of England." "Lily," Emily said with a warning glance. "What?" Lily said, holding up her hands. "It's not like it's possible." "It could be," Jonah insisted, his small hands gripping the edge of the table. "Ethan looks exactly like me. Mom said she'd meet him." Sam froze, his fork hovering midair. "Ethan?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Yeah," Jonah said. "He's in my class. And he's the same height as me, too." Sam forced a laugh, though Emily caught the tension in his voice. "That's a funny coincidence," he said, quickly changing the subject. "So, Lily, how's high school?" Lily rolled her eyes, but went along with the diversion. "It's fine, I guess. The cafeteria food's gross, though." As the conversation shifted, Emily kept a close eye on Sam. His usual easygoing demeanor had cracked for a moment, and she couldn't ignore the flicker of unease that crossed his face when Jonah mentioned Ethan. That night, as Emily tucked Jonah into bed, he looked up at her with wide, expectant eyes. "Mom, do you think Ethan could really be my twin?" She hesitated, smoothing the blanket over him. "I think it's a special thing to meet someone who reminds you of yourself. But you know, families come in all shapes and sizes. What matters is that we love each other, right?" Jonah seemed to consider this, then nodded. "Yeah, I guess." "Good night, Jonah," she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "Good night, Mom," he murmured, his voice already heavy with sleep. As she closed his door and made her way to the master bedroom, Emily's mind refused to settle. The way Sam had reacted at dinner gnawed at her. It was probably nothing, she told herself. Just a coincidence, as he'd said. Still, as she crawled into bed beside Sam, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, more than Jonah's vivid imagination or Ethan's uncanny resemblance. Emily stared at the ceiling, her husband already asleep beside her. The weight of the day pressed down on her, but so did the pull of curiosity. If Jonah was right, if Ethan truly resembled him so much, then the world had just thrown something unexpected into their carefully planned fresh start. Little did she know, the answer she sought would unravel more than she ever imagined. The next morning, the household buzzed with the usual weekday chaos. Jonah scarfed down a bowl of cereal at lightning speed while Lily groaned her way through her morning routine. Sam stood in the kitchen, sipping his coffee, his shirt untucked, and hair still mussed from sleep. "Dad, can you drive me to school?" Lily asked, slinging her backpack over one shoulder. Sam glanced at the clock. "Sure, but you've got 5 minutes. If you're not in the car by then, you're walking." Emily watched them from the doorway, her arms folded. Sam's relaxed tone seemed forced, a mask to cover his unease from the night before. She couldn't let it go. "Jonah," she called, motioning toward him, "grab your lunch and get your shoes on, sweetheart. I'll be right back." Jonah nodded and bounded toward the door. Emily waited until both kids were out of earshot before stepping closer to Sam. "Can we talk for a minute?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Sam raised an eyebrow, his mug pausing midair. "What's on your mind?" "It's about Jonah," she said, leaning against the counter. "What he said last night about Ethan, you seemed off." Sam shrugged, taking a long sip of his coffee. "It's just a funny coincidence. Kids get excited about these things. You know how Jonah is." "Maybe," Emily said, watching him carefully. "But the way you reacted didn't feel like you thought it was funny. It felt like you were hiding something." Sam set his mug down with a thud, the smile on his face faltering. "Hiding something? Emily, come on. It's just a silly story Jonah made up." "Then why did you change the subject so fast?" she pressed. For a moment, Sam's face hardened, his jaw tightening. But then he forced a laugh, waving her off. Emily, you're reading too much into this. Let it go, okay? Before she could respond, Lily called from the front door. Dad, let's go, or I'm going to be late. Sam grabbed his keys and offered Emily a quick peck on the cheek. We'll talk later, he said, heading out the door. Emily stood there, staring after him, the uneasy feeling in her chest growing stronger. After dropping Jonah off at school, Emily decided to stop by the grocery store. The shopping list in her hand felt like a thin excuse for the way her thoughts churned. The resemblance Jonah claimed to see in Ethan kept nagging at her. What if there was more to it? As she pushed her cart through the aisles, she spotted another mother from Jonah's class. Claire Parker, a petite woman with kind eyes and dark curls, waved as she approached. Emily, right? Claire said, balancing a basket on her arm. Yes, hi. Emily replied with a polite smile. Jonah's mom. Ethan talks about him all the time, Claire added, her tone warm. Emily hesitated, the words tumbling out before she could stop herself. Actually, Jonah's been talking about Ethan too. He says they look alike. Really alike. Claire's eyebrows lifted in surprise. I've noticed that too. It's uncanny, isn't it? Relief flooded Emily at Claire's reaction. She wasn't imagining things. It is, she admitted. Jonah even called Ethan his twin. Claire chuckled softly. Then her expression turned thoughtful. You know, Ethan's adopted. I don't know much about his biological family, though. Maybe there's some truth to Jonah's idea. Emily blinked. Adopted? Claire nodded. We adopted him when he was just a baby. It's always been an open part of our family story. A flurry of questions swirled in Emily's mind, but she bit her tongue. Claire barely knew her. It wasn't the time to start prying into her personal history. Well, Emily said carefully, Jonah's been insistent about it. I think it's sweet how they've connected so quickly. It is, Claire agreed, her smile returning. Maybe we should get the boys together outside of school sometime. They clearly get along well. Emily nodded, forcing a smile. That's a great idea. Let me know when you're free. They exchanged numbers before parting ways, but Emily's mind was far from at ease. That evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Jonah could hardly contain his excitement. Ethan's mom said we could hang out, he announced between bites of mac and cheese. That's nice, Jonah, Emily said, glancing at Sam. His face remained carefully neutral as he scooped vegetables onto his plate. Just make sure you don't get into too much trouble, he said lightly. Dad, can you believe Ethan and I might be twins? Jonah asked, his blue eyes wide with wonder. Sam froze for the briefest moment before laughing. I think you're letting your imagination run wild, buddy. Come on, Dad. You'll see when you meet him, Jonah insisted. Emily watched Sam closely, noticing how he avoided meeting her eyes. Later that night, as Emily folded laundry in their bedroom, she couldn't hold back any longer. Sam, she said, her voice steady but firm, we need to talk. He sighed, setting down the book he'd been pretending to read. About what? About Jonah and Ethan, she said, turning to face him. Claire told me today that Ethan is adopted. Sam's brow furrowed, his expression unreadable. So, what does that have to do with us? Don't you think it's a strange coincidence? Emily pressed. 2 boys in the same class, looking so much alike, and one of them is adopted? You don't think that's worth looking into? Sam hesitated, running a hand through his hair. Emily, you're making something out of nothing. No, Sam, she said, her voice rising slightly. You're dismissing this like it doesn't matter, but it does. Jonah believes there's a connection, and honestly, so do I. Why are you so against the idea of finding out the truth? He stood abruptly, his shoulders tense. Because sometimes the truth doesn't change anything. It just makes things harder. Emily stared at him, her heart sinking. What are you not telling me? Sam shook his head, his voice softening. Emily, please, just drop it, for Jonah's sake. But she couldn't. Not now. The weight of Sam's words only deepened her resolve. Whatever he was hiding, she needed to find out for herself and for Jonah. As Sam retreated into the bathroom, shutting the door behind him, Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her thoughts racing. She couldn't ignore the feeling that her family's fresh start was tied to something much bigger than she had imagined. Little did she know, The answer she sought would soon test the very foundations of her family's trust. The morning dawned crisp and clear, with sunlight spilling into the Williams home as Jonah bounded into the kitchen, already dressed for school. His face beamed with excitement, and Emily couldn't help but smile at his energy, though her thoughts were still clouded by the tense exchange with Sam the night before. "It's picture day," Jonah announced, sliding into his seat at the breakfast table. "That explains why your shirt is actually tucked in for once," Emily teased gently, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. "I want to look good for the class photo," Jonah said, his voice muffled as he shoveled eggs into his mouth. "Ethan and I are going to stand next to each other. Then everyone will see how much we look alike." Emily paused, coffee mug in hand. "You and Ethan planned this?" Jonah nodded, his blue eyes sparkling. "Yeah, we're going to ask the teacher. It's going to be so cool, Mom. When you see the picture, you'll believe me." A strange mixture of curiosity and apprehension settled over Emily. She reached over to smooth Jonah's hair, still slightly damp from his hurried shower. "I'm sure it'll be a great picture," she said softly. At Maplewood Elementary, Jonah's plan unfolded perfectly. He and Ethan stood side by side in the second row, their identical grins directed at the camera. The photographer, a grizzled man with a bushy mustache, adjusted his lens and frowned slightly. "Well, aren't you two peas in a pod?" he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. Jonah and Ethan exchanged triumphant glances, but said nothing. By the time Jonah returned home that afternoon, his excitement was practically spilling over. Mom, I can't wait for you to see the photo," he called out as he ran through the door. Emily smiled from the kitchen, where she was peeling carrots for dinner. "It'll be a few days before we get the pictures back, Jonah. You'll have to be patient." "I know," Jonah said, plopping down at the table, "but you're going to see it, and you'll believe me then." Emily chuckled softly, but her mind was already racing. She could sense that this was no fleeting childhood obsession for Jonah. There was something about Ethan that he truly felt was significant, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that he might be right. 2 days later, Jonah bounded off the school bus with an envelope in hand, his face glowing with excitement. "Mom, the pictures came," he shouted as he bolted through the door. Emily was in the living room folding laundry when Jonah thrust the envelope toward her. His hands trembled as she carefully opened it, sliding the glossy photo into view. "There," Jonah said, pointing to the center of the second row. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Jonah and Ethan stood side by side, their resemblance uncanny. The same tousled dark hair, the same vivid blue eyes. Even their smiles, with slightly crooked front teeth, were eerily alike. For a long moment, Emily couldn't speak. She traced the edges of the photo with her fingers, her heart pounding. It wasn't just Jonah's imagination or coincidence. The boys truly looked like twins. "Well," Jonah asked eagerly, "do you believe me now?" Emily swallowed hard, her voice faltering. "You're right, sweetheart. You two really do look alike." Jonah's face lit up. "See? I told you." But Emily's mind was already racing. If this was more than a coincidence, then how? Why? She needed answers, and she needed them soon. That evening, as Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photo, Sam walked in from the garage, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He froze when he saw the picture in her hands. "What's that?" he asked, his voice tight. Emily looked up, her gaze steady. "The class photos." Jonah and Ethan stood next to each other. Sam approached cautiously, leaning over her shoulder to glance at the picture. When he saw the boys' faces, his jaw tightened. "It's just a picture," he said after a moment, his tone dismissive. "It's not just a picture, Sam." Emily shot back, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Look at them. They could be twins. You can't tell me this doesn't bother you." Sam straightened, tossing the rag onto the counter. "Emily, you're letting your imagination get the better of you. Kids look alike all the time." Emily stood, holding the photo up between them. "This isn't just some coincidence, Sam. I met Ethan's mom. She told me Ethan is adopted." Sam flinched, the color draining from his face. "You knew, didn't you?" Emily pressed, her voice trembling. "You've been acting strange ever since Jonah mentioned Ethan. What aren't you telling me?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Sam said, his tone defensive. "Don't lie to me." Emily said, her voice rising. If there's something you know about Jonah, about his past, I need to know. I deserve to know. Sam's eyes darted to the side, his hands clenching into fists. I think you're reading too much into this, he said quietly. Emily's heart sank. His evasion only confirmed her suspicions. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the kitchen, clutching the photo in her hand. That night, as Emily lay awake in bed, her thoughts spiraled. The photo was undeniable proof that Jonah and Ethan shared something more than a casual resemblance. But Sam's reaction unsettled her even more. He was hiding something. She was sure of it. Quietly, she slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway to Jonah's room. She pushed the door open and found him fast asleep, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Sitting on the edge of his bed, Emily gently brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. Her heart ached with love for him, but also with the weight of unanswered questions. She had to find out the truth. For Jonah, for their family. The next step, she decided, was to call Claire. If anyone could help unravel this mystery, it was Ethan's mother. With a quiet determination, Emily rose from the bed and returned to her room, slipping under the covers beside Sam. She stared at the ceiling, her mind made up. The answers were out there. She just had to find them. Emily woke the next morning with a sense of quiet determination. The house was still and calm as the sun's first rays poured through the window blinds. Sam was already up and moving about, the soft murmur of his voice carrying from the living room where he was on a work call. Jonah's giggles echoed faintly from his room, likely from whatever cartoon he had turned on. Emily sat at the kitchen table, nursing her coffee, the class photo lying in front of her. The boys' identical faces stared back at her, their mischievous grins frozen in time. She had spent the night turning over possibilities in her mind, but there was only one thing she could do to get answers: talk to Claire. With her mug in one hand and her phone in the other, Emily dialed Claire's number. The line rang twice before Claire's cheerful voice answered. Hello. Hi, Claire, it's Emily, she said, trying to steady her nerves. Jonah's mom. Claire replied warmly. How are you? I'm okay, Emily said carefully. I was actually wondering if you'd have time to meet. There's something I'd like to talk to you about. It's about the boys. A pause hung between them, and Emily worried she had been too forward. Sure, Claire said finally, her tone thoughtful. Would you like to meet for coffee? There's a little cafe downtown, the Willow Bean. It's quiet, and we can talk there. That sounds perfect, Emily said, relief washing over her. Does later this afternoon work? Absolutely, Claire said. I'll see you there. The Willow Bean was a quaint, inviting cafe tucked between two larger buildings on Main Street. Its large windows let in streams of light, and the smell of freshly baked scones greeted Emily as she stepped inside. Claire was already seated at a small table near the corner, waving with a smile. Her dark curls framed her kind face, and her eyes carried the same warmth that Ethan had. Hi, Emily, she said, standing to greet her. Hi, Claire, Emily replied, shaking her hand. They both sat, and a server approached to take their orders. Emily settled on a latte, while Claire chose herbal tea. So, Claire began, leaning forward slightly. You wanted to talk about the boys? Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure how to begin. Finally, she took a deep breath and placed the class photo on the table. This is Jonah and Ethan from picture day, she said, sliding the photo toward Claire. Claire picked it up, her brows lifting as she studied the image. Wow, she said softly, shaking her head. They really do look alike. I mean, it's uncanny. Emily nodded. That's what Jonah's been saying for days. At first, I thought it was just his imagination, but seeing this, she gestured to the photo. It's more than a coincidence, isn't it? Claire placed the photo back on the table, her expression thoughtful. I've been thinking the same thing, honestly. Ethan hasn't stopped talking about Jonah since they met. And it's not just their looks, he says they like the same things, laugh the same way. Emily leaned forward, lowering her voice. Claire, you mentioned before that Ethan was adopted. Do you know anything about his biological family? Claire sighed, her hands wrapping around her tea mug. Not much, she admitted. The adoption agency didn't provide a lot of details. Just that his birth parents were young and couldn't raise him. I didn't ask too many questions at the time. I was just so excited to finally have a child. Emily nodded, her heart sinking. I see. Do you think the agency might have more information? Claire tilted her head, considering. They might. I still have their contact information at home. If you'd like, I can call them and see what I can find out. Emily felt a surge of gratitude. That would mean so much to me. Thank you, Claire. Of course, Claire said, her smile reassuring. This is important for both of us. If Jonah and Ethan really are connected somehow, we need to know. As they finished their drinks, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Claire shared stories about Ethan's early years, his love of dinosaurs, his first steps, and Emily found herself laughing along. Ethan sounds a lot like Jonah, Emily said, smiling. He's obsessed with dinosaurs, too. I can't tell you how many times I've tripped over toy raptors in the hallway. Claire laughed, nodding. Oh, I know the feeling. Ethan has a whole herd of them lined up on his bookshelf. For a moment, the weight of their conversation lifted, replaced by the shared joy of motherhood. As they parted ways outside the cafe, Claire touched Emily's arm gently. Whatever we find out, just know I'm here for you. This kind of thing can be overwhelming, but we'll figure it out together. Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. Thank you, Claire. That means more than you know. Back at home, Emily found herself staring at the photo again. Jonah's bright grin seemed to hold a world of questions, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope that they might find answers. As she tucked Jonah into bed that night, he looked up at her with curious eyes. Mom, did you talk to Ethan's mom today? I did, she said, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. We're going to see if we can find out more about why you and Ethan look so much alike. Jonah's face lit up. Do you think we're really twins? Emily smiled softly, her heart aching at the innocence in his question. I don't know yet, sweetheart. But no matter what, you're my son, and I love you. I love you too, Mom, Jonah said, wrapping his small arms around her. As she kissed his forehead and turned out the light, Emily felt a renewed sense of determination. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it for Jonah's sake. Little did she know, the journey she and Claire were about to embark on would uncover truths that would forever change their lives. The following morning, Emily's thoughts raced as she prepared Jonah's lunch. The weight of the conversation with Claire hung over her, but alongside it was a glimmer of hope. If Claire could retrieve more information from the adoption agency, they might finally get answers to the mystery that had taken hold of their lives. Mom, do I have time to grab my Dino book before the bus comes? Jonah asked, popping his head into the kitchen. Emily glanced at the clock and smiled. If you're fast. Jonah sprinted away, his footsteps echoing through the hall. Emily watched him go, her heart swelling with affection. No matter what they discovered, Jonah was her son. Nothing would change that. As the sound of the bus's horn blared, Emily grabbed Jonah's backpack and rushed to the door. Here, she called, handing it to him as he darted out to catch the bus. She waved until he disappeared down the street, then closed the door with a sigh. Her phone vibrated on the counter, breaking her train of thought. It was Claire. Good morning, Claire, Emily said, her voice tinged with nervous anticipation. Emily, Claire Raplia. Her tone was calm, but there was an edge of urgency beneath it. I just got off the phone with the adoption agency. They couldn't share much without a formal request, but they did confirm one thing. Emily's breath hitched. What is it? They said Ethan has a sibling, Claire said softly. They didn't give me a name, but they confirmed that his twin brother was adopted by another family. The words landed like a bolt of lightning, leaving Emily momentarily speechless. Twin brother, she whispered, the reality sinking in. Jonah. It has to be, Claire said. The timelines match. The agency wouldn't confirm anything outright, but I could tell they knew more than they were saying. Emily gripped the edge of the counter for support. She had suspected this might be the case, but hearing it confirmed sent a rush of emotions through her: relief, disbelief, and a flicker of anger. Thank you for calling them, Emily said, her voice shaking. I need to talk to Sam about this. Take your time, Claire said gently. This isn't easy, I know, but if you need anything, I'm here. That evening, Emily waited until Jonah was in bed before confronting Sam. She stood in the doorway of his workshop, where he was tinkering with an old radio. The smell of motor oil lingered in the air. "Sam, we need to talk," she said firmly. He glanced up, his expression guarded. "About what?" "About Jonah," Emily said, stepping into the room. "I spoke with Claire today. The adoption agency confirmed that Ethan has a twin brother." Sam froze, the screwdriver in his hand slipping and clattering onto the workbench. "They wouldn't give her a name," Emily continued, her voice trembling. "But it's Jonah, isn't it? You knew all along." Sam's face paled, and he leaned heavily against the bench. "Emily, don't lie to me," she said, her voice breaking. "I need the truth, Sam. Did you know Jonah has a twin?" He sighed deeply, running a hand over his face. "Yes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I knew." Emily's chest tightened, anger and betrayal bubbling to the surface. "How could you keep something like this from me?" "From Jonah?" "It wasn't my choice," Sam said quickly, his voice desperate. "When we adopted Jonah, the agency told me his twin had already been placed with another family. They made it clear there would be no contact between them." Emily's hands trembled. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You had just gone through so much," Sam said, his voice cracking. "Losing the baby nearly broke you, Emily. When the agency called about Jonah, it felt like a miracle. I thought telling you about the twin would only make it harder." "That wasn't your decision to make," Emily snapped. "I deserve to know the truth." "I know," Sam said, his shoulders sagging. "I should have told you. I didn't want to lose the family we had finally started to build." Emily sank into a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands. The weight of Sam's confession pressed down on her, but beneath the anger was a small seed of understanding. She knew he had acted out of love, but it didn't erase the years of deception. After a long silence, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Jonah and Ethan deserve to know each other. We have to do this for them." Sam nodded, his face etched with guilt. "I'll support whatever you decide." The next morning, Emily called Claire and explained everything Sam had confessed. Claire listened quietly, her understanding tones soothing Emily's frayed nerves. "I think the next step is to confirm everything with a DNA test," Emily said. "That way, we'll know for sure." "I agree," Claire said. "There's a clinic in town that does sibling DNA testing. We could take the boys there together." Emily hesitated, the idea of involving Jonah in something so life-changing making her heart ache. "How do we tell them?" "Gently," Claire said. "But I think they're already halfway there. Ethan's been calling Jonah his twin since they met." Emily smiled despite herself. "Jonah, too. He's been so sure of this from the beginning." That evening, Emily and Sam sat Jonah down in the living room. He looked up at them with wide, curious eyes, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "Jonah, we need to talk about something important," Emily began, her voice soft but steady. "Okay," Jonah said, his brow furrowing. "You know how you've been saying Ethan might be your twin?" Emily continued. Jonah nodded eagerly. "Yeah, well," she said, taking his hand, "we think you might be right. But to be sure, we're going to do a special test tomorrow. It's called a DNA test, and it'll tell us if you and Ethan are really brothers." Jonah's eyes widened, and a huge grin spread across his face. "Really? Ethan might really be my twin?" Emily nodded, tears prickling her eyes. "Yes, sweetie." Jonah leapt up and hugged her tightly. "I knew it. I told you." Emily laughed softly, holding him close. "You were right, Jonah. You were right all along." The next morning, Emily and Claire met at the clinic, their boys in tow. Jonah and Ethan were buzzing with excitement, holding hands as they skipped ahead of their mothers. The nurse explained the process, swabbing the boys' cheeks while they giggled and whispered to each other. Emily and Claire watched, their emotions a mix of hope and apprehension. "Do you think we'll look even more alike when we grow up?" Jonah asked Ethan. "Totally," Ethan replied. "We'll be like twins in a movie." Emily exchanged a smile with Claire. Whatever the test revealed, it was clear the boys had already formed an unbreakable bond. As they left the clinic, the nurse assured them the results would be ready in 2 days. Emily squeezed Jonah's hand as they walked to the car, her heart heavy with anticipation. 2 days. 2 days until they would finally know the truth. The 2 days leading up to the DNA results felt like an eternity for Emily. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart leapt, only to sink when it was just a reminder or an email. She had cleaned the house twice, cooked elaborate meals no one had asked for, and fussed over Jonah so much that he finally asked, "Mom, are you okay?" Claire had texted her earlier that morning. "Today's the day. Call me when you're ready to meet." Now, as the hours dragged on, Emily found herself pacing the living room, glancing at the clock every few minutes. Jonah was at school, and Sam had left early for work, giving her space. When her phone finally rang, the clinic's name flashing on the screen, Emily froze. Taking a deep breath, she answered, her voice trembling. "Hello, Mrs. Williams," the receptionist said kindly. "Your results are ready. You can come by the clinic to pick them up any time today." Emily thanked her and hung up, her hands shaking. She immediately dialed Claire. "They're ready," she said, barely able to contain her nerves. "Meet me at the clinic in 30 minutes, Claire replied. "We'll open them together." The clinic waiting room was quiet, the soft hum of an air purifier the only sound. Emily sat on one of the cushioned chairs, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. Claire arrived moments later, Ethan trailing behind her. The boys had begged to come along, but Emily had decided to leave Jonah at school. The gravity of what they were about to uncover felt too overwhelming to share with him just yet. "Hi," Claire said softly, sitting beside Emily. She looked as nervous as Emily felt, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. A nurse approached, holding a sealed envelope. "Here are your results," she said, handing it over with a small smile. Emily's fingers trembled as she took the envelope. She and Claire exchanged a glance, then stepped into a small, private consultation room. The air felt heavy as Emily carefully opened the envelope, unfolding the paper inside. The words seemed to blur for a moment, and then they came into focus. Probability of sibling relationship, 99.9%. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "They're twins," she whispered, her voice trembling. Claire leaned over, her eyes scanning the document. Her hand flew to her mouth as tears welled up in her eyes. "Oh my God," she murmured. "They really are." The two women sat in stunned silence, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Emily felt a rush of emotions: joy, relief, and a pang of sadness for all the years the boys had missed together. "This changed everything," Claire said finally, wiping her eyes. Emily nodded, her own tears spilling over. "It does." That afternoon, Emily picked Jonah up from school early. He was surprised but excited, especially when she told him they were going to see Ethan. "Mom, is it about the test?" he asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. "Yes," Emily said, smiling at him in the rearview mirror. "It's about the test." When they arrived at Claire's house, Ethan was already waiting on the porch, practically bouncing with excitement. Jonah barely had time to unbuckle his seatbelt before Ethan ran up to him. "Jonah!" Ethan shouted. "We're twins! It's real!" Jonah's face lit up, and he threw his arms around Ethan. "I knew it," he said, laughing. Emily and Claire stood a few steps away, watching the boys with tears in their eyes. "They're so happy," Claire said softly. "They are," Emily agreed. "I can't believe it took us this long to find each other." Claire nodded. "But at least they have each other now. That's what matters." Later that evening, back at home, Emily sat Sam down to share the results. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped as if he had been carrying the weight of his guilt for far too long. "They're twins, Sam," she said, placing the paper in front of him. He stared at the document, his jaw tightening. "I figured as much," he said quietly. Emily crossed her arms, the anger she had been holding back finally spilling out. "You knew this was a possibility all along, didn't you? You knew Jonah might have a brother out there, and you said nothing." "I didn't know," Sam said, his voice strained. "I suspected, but the agency told me there was no way to trace the other twin. They said it was best to leave it alone." "Best for who?" Emily demanded. "For you? For the agency?" "It wasn't best for Jonah or Ethan." Sam ran a hand through his hair, his eyes filled with regret. "I thought I was protecting us. Protecting you. I didn't want to reopen old wounds." Emily's voice softened, though the hurt still lingered. Sam, you can't protect me from everything. I'm stronger than you think. And Jonah, he deserved to know the truth. I know, Sam whispered. I'm sorry, Emily, for all of it. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling between them. We need to move forward, Emily said finally. For Jonah's sake. He and Ethan are so happy to have found each other. We need to support that. Sam nodded. You're right. I'll do whatever it takes. The next day, Jonah and Ethan couldn't stop talking about their plans. Can I sleep over at Ethan's house this weekend? Jonah asked eagerly during dinner. Let's take it one step at a time, Emily said with a smile. Come on, Mom, Jonah said, grinning. Sam chuckled softly, ruffling Jonah's hair. We'll figure it out, champ. Emily watched the interaction, a flicker of hope stirring in her heart. Despite the mistakes and the pain, they were finding their way forward together. As she tucked Jonah into bed that night, he looked up at her with a sleepy smile. Mom, do you think Ethan and I will always be together now? Emily leaned down, brushing his hair back. I think you and Ethan will always have each other, no matter what. Jonah nodded, his eyes drifting closed. I'm glad he's my brother, he murmured. Emily stayed by his side long after he fell asleep, her heart full of love and determination. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face it. For Jonah, for Ethan, for their family. The next morning, Emily woke early, sunlight streaming through the curtains. She stared at the ceiling, the events of the last few days replaying in her mind. The confirmation that Jonah and Ethan were twins had felt surreal, like pieces of a puzzle snapping into place. But now came the challenge of building a relationship that had been absent for years. As she entered the kitchen, she found Sam already awake, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. He looked up, his expression a mix of exhaustion and resolve. Morning, he said softly. Morning, Emily replied, grabbing her own mug. She hesitated, then sat down across from him. I know this hasn't been easy for you. Sam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I messed up, Emily. I should have told you everything from the start. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now I just made things harder. Emily nodded, her voice steady but kind. You did what you thought was best. But now, we need to focus on moving forward for Jonah and Ethan. They're so happy to have found each other. A small smile tugged at Sam's lips. They really are, aren't they? They are, Emily said. And they deserve to have a strong foundation for this new relationship. Sam reached across the table, his hand covering hers. Whatever it takes, Emily. I'm in this with you. Emily squeezed his hand, a glimmer of hope warming her chest. That afternoon, Emily called Claire. Hey, Claire said brightly. How's Jonah doing today? He's been floating on air, Emily replied with a chuckle. I was actually wondering if you and Ethan would like to come over for dinner tomorrow. I think it's time we start spending more time together as a family. I'd love that, Claire said. And Ethan will be thrilled. He's been asking about Jonah nonstop. Great, Emily said, feeling a surge of excitement. Let's make it happen. The next evening, the Williams home buzzed with activity as Emily prepared for their guests. Jonah hovered near the kitchen, practically bouncing with excitement. When are they getting here? He asked for the third time in as many minutes. Soon, Emily said, laughing. Why don't you go set up your toys in the living room? I'm sure Ethan will want to play when he gets here. Jonah grinned and raced off, leaving Emily to finish setting the table. When the doorbell finally rang, Jonah was the first to answer, flinging the door open to reveal Ethan and Claire. Ethan, Jonah shouted, throwing his arms around his brother. Jonah, Ethan replied, hugging him back. Emily and Claire exchanged smiles as the boys launched into an animated conversation, their words tumbling over each other in their excitement. Dinner was a lively affair, filled with laughter and stories. The boys shared tales of their favorite games and pranks they'd pulled at school, while Emily and Claire marveled at their similarities. I can't believe how much they have in common, Claire said, shaking her head. It's like they've known each other forever, Emily replied. Sam, who had been quiet for most of the evening, finally spoke up. It's incredible, he said, his voice soft. Seeing them together like this, it's a gift. Claire nodded, her eyes misty. It really is. After dinner, the boys dashed off to the backyard, where Jonah proudly showed Ethan his collection of remote control cars. "They're going to wear themselves out," Emily said, watching from the patio. Claire laughed. "That's the goal, right?" The two women sat together, sipping tea as the boys' laughter echoed through the yard. Later, as the evening wound down, Claire pulled Emily aside. "I've been thinking," Claire began hesitantly. "Ethan's been asking if Jonah could come over for a sleepover sometime. I think it could be good for them." Emily smiled. "Jonah would love that. And I think you're right, they need time to bond." Claire relaxed, her smile widening. "Great. Let's plan something soon." That night, after Claire and Ethan had left, Emily tucked Jonah into bed. He looked up at her, his face glowing with happiness. "Mom, today was the best day ever," he said, his voice sleepy but content. "I'm glad, sweetheart," Emily replied, brushing his hair back. "Do you think Ethan and I will be best friends forever?" Emily felt a lump in her throat. "I think you and Ethan are going to be more than best friends, you're brothers. And brothers stick together." Jonah nodded, his eyes drifting closed. "I like having a brother," he murmured. Emily sat by his bedside for a long time, watching him sleep. The journey ahead would have its challenges, but tonight, she felt nothing but gratitude for the new chapter that had begun. The next day, Sam approached Emily in the kitchen, holding a worn photo album. "What's that?" Emily asked. "I've been thinking about everything," Sam said. "About Jonah, Ethan, and how we move forward. I found this in the garage. It's all the pictures we've taken of Jonah over the years. I thought maybe we could share it with Ethan and Claire. Give them a piece of the story they've missed." Emily's eyes softened as she took the album. "That's a wonderful idea." Sam nodded. "It's the least we can do. They've missed so much time already. Maybe this can help bridge the gap." As Emily flipped through the pages, memories flooded back: Jonah's first steps, his gap-toothed smile on his first day of kindergarten, the countless bedtime stories they'd shared. "We'll share this with them," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "And we'll create new memories together." Sam wrapped an arm around her, and for the first time in weeks, Emily felt a sense of peace. They had made mistakes, but they were moving forward one step at a time. The air was crisp and cool as Emily parked her car in front of Claire's home that Saturday morning. In the back seat, Jonah hummed excitedly to himself, clutching the worn photo album Sam had given him. Today was the long-awaited day, a sleepover at Ethan's house. Jonah could hardly sit still, and truthfully, Emily shared his anticipation. "Do you have everything?" she asked as she helped Jonah out of the car. "Yep. My toothbrush, my pajamas, a dinosaur book, and the album," Jonah rattled off, practically bouncing on his toes. As they walked up the porch steps, the door swung open to reveal Ethan, who greeted Jonah with a loud, "Finally, you're here." The boys embraced in a way that only newly reunited brothers could, their bond as natural as if they'd never been apart. Claire appeared behind Ethan, smiling warmly. "Morning, Emily," she said. "Morning," Emily replied, stepping inside. The house was cozy and welcoming, decorated with family photos and the kind of clutter that came with a child's energetic presence. Jonah and Ethan dashed upstairs immediately, their laughter echoing down the hall. Emily handed the photo album to Claire. "This is something we wanted to share," she explained. "It's an album of Jonah's life, so far his first steps, his first day of school, all the moments we've captured." Claire opened the album, her eyes scanning the photos. She lingered on a picture of toddler Jonah with chocolate smeared across his face. "He looks so much like Ethan did at that age," she said softly, her voice tinged with wonder. "I thought it might help," Emily said, "to give you a glimpse of the years you missed." Claire's eyes misted as she turned another page, revealing Jonah's first soccer game. "This means so much to me, Emily. Thank you for sharing this." Emily placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're in this together now. Jonah and Ethan aren't the only ones reconnecting, we are too." Claire smiled, and the weight of their shared journey felt lighter for a moment. Upstairs, the boys were a whirlwind of energy. Jonah showed Ethan his dinosaur book, and Ethan introduced Jonah to his collection of model planes. "We're going to make the best team ever," Ethan declared as they pieced together a Lego castle. "Totally," Jonah agreed. "Hey, we should build a fort later." "Yeah, and we can pretend it's a twin fortress," Ethan added, grinning. The two boys erupted into laughter, their imaginations running wild. Meanwhile, Emily and Claire settled in the living room with cups of tea. "I can't believe how quickly they've bonded," Emily said, shaking her head. "It's like they've been waiting their whole lives to find each other." "I know," Claire agreed. "It's incredible to watch, and it's a reminder of how resilient kids are." Emily hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I just hope Sam and I can support Jonah the way he needs. This has been such a big change for all of us." Claire reached out, her voice steady. "You're already doing that, Emily. It's clear how much Jonah feels loved and supported. And as for Sam, I'm sure he'll find his way. It's not easy to confront the past, but he seems willing to try." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude for Claire's kindness. As the afternoon unfolded, the boys insisted on building their twin fortress in the backyard. With blankets, cushions, and a few strategically placed lawn chairs, they created a sprawling hideout that, to them, was impenetrable. "Mom!" Jonah called from inside the fort. "Can we have snacks in here? It's part of our twin mission." Emily and Claire exchanged amused glances before gathering a plate of sandwiches and a pitcher of lemonade. "Here you go, Commanders," Claire said, sliding the tray into the fortress. "Thanks, Mom," Ethan shouted. "Thanks, Mrs. Williams," Jonah echoed. From their seats on the patio, Emily and Claire watched as the boys plotted their imaginary adventures, their laughter filling the air. "They've created their own little world," Claire said. Emily smiled. "It's beautiful to see." As the day turned to evening, the boys reluctantly came inside, their faces glowing with happiness. Claire had prepared spaghetti for dinner, and the boys devoured it with enthusiasm. "After dinner, we're going to watch a movie in the fort," Ethan announced. "That's fine," Claire said. "Just don't stay up too late." Jonah grinned at Ethan. "Let's watch something with dinosaurs." "Obviously," Ethan replied, as if it were the most natural choice in the world. After the boys disappeared upstairs, Emily and Claire sat in the kitchen, enjoying a rare moment of quiet. "Thank you for today," Emily said. "Seeing Jonah, so happy, it's everything I could have hoped for." Claire nodded. "I feel the same way. This is the start of something special for all of us." They sat in companionable silence, the bond between them deepening as they shared the weight of the journey they had undertaken for their sons. Later that night, as Emily returned home, the house felt quiet without Jonah. She wandered into the living room, her fingers brushing the edges of the framed photos on the mantel. Sam joined her, his footsteps soft on the carpet. "How was it?" he asked. "It was wonderful," Emily said, turning to him. "Jonah and Ethan are inseparable. It's like they've known each other forever." Sam smiled, though it was tinged with regret. "I wish I'd handled things differently, Emily, but I want to do better. For Jonah. For us." Emily placed a hand on his cheek, her voice soft. "We can't change the past, Sam, but we can choose how we move forward. And right now, we have two incredible boys who need us to show up for them." Sam nodded, wrapping his arms around her. "We'll figure it out, together." As Emily leaned into his embrace, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Their family had been through so much, but they were finding their way back to each other, one step at a time. And for Jonah and Ethan, this was only the beginning of a lifelong bond that would shape them both in ways they had yet to imagine. The Williams household was unusually quiet the morning after Jonah's sleepover. Emily lingered in the kitchen, the soft hum of the dishwasher filling the air as she prepared breakfast. She was anxious to hear how Jonah's night with Ethan had gone, but more than that, she was reflecting on the steady progress her family was making. Sam walked in, rubbing his face as he sat at the table. His usual early morning grogginess seemed heavier today. "Sleep okay?" Emily asked, placing a mug of coffee in front of him. Sam nodded, but didn't look up. "I've been thinking about everything," he said after a moment, his voice low. Emily slid into the chair across from him. "What's on your mind?" He hesitated, his hand tightening around the mug. "How do I fix this?" Emily tilted her head, softening her tone. "Sam, you've been trying. That's what matters. Jonah can see it, and so can I. But it's not enough," Sam said, shaking his head. "I kept something huge from both of you. I can't expect things to go back to normal overnight. Emily reached across the table, taking his hand. No, it won't happen overnight. But we're taking steps. Every day, we're rebuilding. Sam finally met her eyes, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. We'll get there, Emily added, offering him a small smile. Together. By mid-morning, Emily's phone buzzed. It was Claire. Hey, Claire said, her voice bright. The boys are ready for you to pick Jonah up. They've been planning all kinds of adventures for their next sleepover. Emily chuckled. That sounds like them. I'll head over now. When Emily arrived at Claire's house, she found Jonah and Ethan sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by Lego pieces. Mom! Jonah shouted, jumping up to greet her. Guess what? Ethan and I built a castle, and it has a secret tunnel. Ethan grinned. We're going to build a bigger one next time, right, Jonah? Definitely, Jonah replied. Emily smiled, ruffling Jonah's hair. Sounds like you two had a great time. We did, Jonah said, his eyes sparkling. Ethan's the best brother ever. Emily's heart swelled at his words. I'm glad, sweetheart. Now let's get home. We've got some errands to run before dinner. On the drive home, Jonah chattered nonstop about his sleepover. Emily listened, her heart full as she caught glimpses of him in the rearview mirror. Mom, Jonah said suddenly, his tone serious. Yes, sweetie? Why didn't Ethan and I grow up together? He asked, his small face thoughtful. Emily's chest tightened. She had known this question would come eventually, but it didn't make answering it any easier. Jonah, she began carefully, when you and Ethan were born, you were placed with different families. It's not because anyone wanted to keep you apart, it just happened that way. But now, you've found each other, and that's what matters. Jonah nodded slowly. I'm glad we found each other. So am I, Emily said, her voice soft. That evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Jonah brought out the photo album Sam had given him. Dad, can we show Ethan some more pictures next time he comes over? Jonah asked. Sam's face softened. Of course, champ. I bet he'd love that. Jonah grinned, flipping through the pages as he narrated each memory. This was my first Halloween. I was a dinosaur. And this is when I learned to ride my bike. Emily watched Sam closely as he listened, his expression a mix of pride and regret. She knew he was still grappling with his mistakes, but moments like this showed that he was committed to moving forward. After dinner, Sam surprised everyone by suggesting a game night. Game night? Jonah asked, his eyes wide with excitement. Yep, Sam said, pulling out a box of Uno cards. Let's see if you can beat me. Jonah and Lily dove into the game with enthusiasm, their laughter filling the living room as Sam playfully accused them of cheating. Emily sat back, watching the scene unfold. For the first time in weeks, the tension in the house felt lighter, replaced by a sense of togetherness. Later, as she tucked Jonah into bed, he looked up at her with a sleepy smile. Mom, do you think Ethan and I will ever live in the same house? He asked. Emily paused, stroking his hair. I don't know, sweetheart, but I do know that you and Ethan will always be close, no matter where you live. Jonah nodded, his eyes drifting closed. I'm glad he's my brother, he murmured. Emily stayed by his side for a moment, her heart full of gratitude for the progress they had made. In the quiet of their bedroom, Emily found Sam sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. You did great tonight, she said, sitting beside him. Sam looked up, his eyes weary but hopeful. It felt good, being present, really being there for them. It felt good. Emily placed a hand on his knee. That's all Jonah and Lily need, Sam, for us to show up for them. Sam nodded, his voice steady. I will. Every day, I'll show up. As they sat together in the dim light, Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. Their family was healing, step by step, and for the first time, the future felt bright. The following Saturday, the Williams family prepared for a special gathering at their home. Claire and Ethan were coming over for dinner, and Emily had spent the morning tidying the house while Jonah and Lily helped Sam set up the backyard. Mom, can Ethan and I sleep in the tent tonight? Jonah asked, dragging a pop-up tent across the lawn. That depends, Emily replied, peeking out the kitchen window. Only if you two promise to actually sleep and not stay up talking all night. Jonah grinned mischievously. We'll think about it. Emily laughed, shaking her head. Jonah's excitement was contagious, and she couldn't help but feel the same. Tonight was about more than dinner. It was a celebration of the family they were building together. By early evening, the smell of barbecue filled the air, and the backyard was lit with strings of twinkling lights that Sam had hung across the fence. Claire and Ethan arrived just as the sun was setting, their arms full of desserts and drinks. "Wow," Claire said, taking in the setup. "This is beautiful, Emily." "Thank you," Emily replied, embracing her. "We wanted to make it special." The boys immediately ran off to inspect the tent, their laughter ringing out as they dove inside. "They're inseparable," Claire said, watching them with a smile. "They are," Emily agreed, her heart swelling. Dinner was a lively affair, with everyone gathered around the large picnic table Sam had built years ago. Plates were piled high with grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and Claire's famous apple pie. The conversation flowed easily, a blend of stories and laughter. Jonah and Ethan recounted their latest school antics, finishing each other's sentences in a way that made everyone smile. "I still can't believe how much they're alike," Claire said, shaking her head. "It's like they've always been together." "It's amazing," Emily replied. "And watching them bond has been everything." Sam, who had been quiet for most of the evening, cleared his throat. "I want to say something," he began, his voice steady but soft. Everyone turned to him, the conversation pausing. "I know I've made mistakes," Sam said, glancing briefly at Emily before looking at Jonah. "I should have been honest from the start about Jonah's past. But seeing him and Ethan together now, it's made me realize how important it is to embrace this moment, to let go of the past and focus on the future." Jonah tilted his head. "Does that mean you're okay with me spending like 1,000,000 sleepovers with Ethan?" Everyone laughed, and Sam smiled. "Yes, Jonah, I'm okay with that." After dinner, the boys convinced everyone to join them in the backyard for a game of flashlight tag. Lily groaned initially, but was soon running through the yard, laughing as the boys gleefully dodged her attempts to tag them. Emily and Claire sat on the patio, sipping coffee and watching the game unfold. "They're so happy," Claire said, her voice warm. "They are," Emily agreed, her heart full. "And so am I." Claire turned to her, her expression thoughtful. "You know, when I adopted Ethan, I never imagined we'd end up here. Finding Jonah, connecting with your family, it's more than I ever could have hoped for." Emily smiled. "I feel the same. This journey hasn't been easy, but it's brought us to something beautiful." As the night wore on, the boys crawled into their tent with sleeping bags, flashlights, and a pile of books. "Do you think we'll ever live in the same house?" Ethan asked, his voice muffled by the tent walls. Jonah shrugged. "Maybe. But even if we don't, we'll still be together all the time. We're twins. That's forever." Ethan grinned. "Yeah, forever." Inside the house, Emily and Sam cleaned up while Claire lingered in the living room, flipping through the photo album Emily had shared. "Thank you for this," Claire said when Emily joined her. "It's like getting to know a part of Ethan I never had before." Emily sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And thank you for being open to all of this. I know it's been a lot to process, but I couldn't have done it without you." Claire smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "We're stronger together." As the evening wound down, Emily stepped out onto the patio, where Sam stood staring at the stars. "Hey," she said, wrapping her arms around him. "Hey," he replied, his voice soft. "It's been a good day." "It has," Emily said, resting her head on his shoulder. Sam exhaled deeply. "I didn't know if we'd get here, Emily. But watching the boys tonight, hearing their laughter, it feels like everything's finally falling into place." Emily smiled, squeezing his hand. "It is. And as long as we keep showing up for them, for each other, we'll be okay." The next morning, as the sun rose over the backyard, the boys emerged from the tent, their hair wild and their faces glowing with excitement. "Mom! Dad!" Jonah shouted, running inside. "Ethan and I have the best idea ever." "What's that?" Emily asked, laughing. "We're going to make a twin time capsule," Jonah announced. Ethan nodded. "We'll put in pictures, toys, and all the stuff that shows how we became brothers again." Emily's heart swelled. "That sounds like a wonderful idea." As the boys set to work gathering items for their time capsule, Emily and Claire watched from the patio, their smiles reflecting the joy of the moment. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but it had led them here to a place of love, connection, and hope for the future. And in the laughter of their sons, they knew they had found something priceless, a new kind of family built on resilience, kindness, and an unbreakable bond. As the boys set to work gathering items for their time capsule, Emily and Claire watched from the patio, their smiles reflecting the joy of the moment. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but it had led them here to a place of love, connection, and hope for the future. And in the laughter of their sons, they knew they had found something priceless, a new kind of family built on resilience, kindness, and an unbreakable bond. If this story moved you, be sure to subscribe to hear more heartwarming tales of love, family, and hope. Let's continue to share stories that inspire us to cherish the connections that matter most. Don't miss the next chapter of life's unexpected journeys. Hit subscribe now.